Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 71, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We're here in the middle of March, and if there were 2 months that I could get rid of in the calendar in Montana, it would be March and August. I really struggle through both those months because the weather is usually really awful. And this March is no exception. I wandered out to my garden yesterday to take a look. The snow is gone, but it'll be a few weeks yet before I can work out there. My husband took the shade cloth off the greenhouse so that I can get in there in the next couple of days and start planting. I am the chairman of a big fundraising plant sale at the end of May, and we grow about half the inventory in my greenhouse. So it's time to get out there and start working on that, which means that my sewing time is dwindling away. I do sew between now and the fall, but my sewing time tends to be a lot more fractured, and honestly, it's hard for me to get enthusiastic about starting a project when I've only got an hour or two to work on it, so I'm going to have to do a little attitude adjustment and just remind myself that any progress is better than no progress. On Tuesday of this past week, I went to Missoula to teach at the Bernina dealer there. It's a store called A Clean Stitch, and I've taught there a couple of times. I went down to teach a ruler class, and the students were using rulers and quilting on their domestic machines. I've taught that class here in Kalispell, but I've taught it on the sit-down long arm machine. So at our store here in Kalispell, I teach it on the Q16. I have a Q20 here at home. I thought the class went really well, but this is just a public service announcement. When you're taking a class, make sure you take all of your sewing machine supplies with you and parts of your machine, because we needed the extended tables to be able to do ruler quilting, and 2 of the students showed up without their extended tables. Fortunately, the store had some that they could put onto their machines, but it's always good to take everything even if you don't think you're going to need it. And from now on, I will make a point of highlighting that in the supply list that goes out to students, just as an additional reminder. It's always fun for me as the teacher to see students start to relax into a technique and have fun with it, and all of the students in this class did that. The rest of this week has been spent on paperwork. I have a mountain of it that I've been dealing with, and I finally got to the bottom of the mountain yesterday. So I rewarded myself by taking a couple of hours to make a zipper pouch out of some leftover pieces of waxed canvas. This is waxed canvas that I had purchased from Clum House in Portland, Oregon, and I'll put a link to their store in the show notes. The pattern that I'm using is from the Bernina We All Sew website, and it's a pattern that I've used before, but I attach my zipper at the beginning of the construction rather than toward the end as in the instructions, so you can try it both ways and see which you prefer. My next big sewing project is going to be a summer robe for my mother. I'm going to use the Itch to Stitch Rosetto robe pattern, and she picked out some dusty pink waffle weave cotton from Minerva. So that will be the next project. I should also mention that I did finish the Tamarack jacket. I started it last week. My husband was out of town for a few days, and when he's out of town, I don't have to cook dinner. I have ice cream for dinner when he's out of town. So I had a lot of sewing time last week, and I knocked out the Tamarack jacket. I made the size 16, which is in the upper size range with the darted bust. And I was really happy with the way the jacket went together. I enjoyed making it, but it is way too small in the shoulders for me. I measured the cross shoulder measurement on the outside of the jacket. It's 16 inches, but if you factor in the bulk of the 1/2 inch seam allowances in quilted fabric on the inside of the jacket, it really cuts the cross shoulder measurement on the inside of the jacket to about 15 inches, which is way, way, way too narrow for me. My cross shoulder measurement, measuring from shoulder tip to shoulder tip, is about 16.5 inches. So I think the next time I make that jacket, and I probably will, I'm definitely going to increase the shoulder width. That's the second Grainline studio pattern that I've made. I also made the Scout tee, and I think they fit well except in the shoulders. The shoulders on both of those patterns were very narrow on me. Even though I was making one of the larger sizes in the size range, so it must be the block that they're using or how they draft their patterns. But if you haven't used any of their patterns, I'm not warning you away from them because I think they're excellent patterns. Just be aware that you may have to do some alterations before you use the pattern. So go ahead and make a muslin. I still have to put the snaps on the Tamarack jacket, and I'm waiting to do that until I have a quiet morning when I can concentrate. I want to get right into today's interview because I have a very interesting guest. One of my listeners suggested that I contact Emma Jones of Emma Jones Vintage Sewing Box. She has a YouTube channel, an Instagram account, a website, a shop, and she and I sat down last week for a lovely conversation. She's a beautiful young lady, and she's doing really amazing things with English paper piecing, and I think that you will enjoy hearing from her. So we're going to get right into it. I'm joined by Emma Jones of Vintage Sewing Box, and Emma has agreed to have an interview with me and talk about her sewing business. She specializes in English paper piecing, and that's a topic we haven't talked about yet. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to talk to you today.
I would love to know how you learned to sew and who taught you. And is this something that you've been doing all of your life, or did you pick it up relatively recently?
Well, I first started learning to sew when I was about 5 years old, and I got craft kits for my birthday. I can remember, the kits children get with pre-punched holes in them, and you sew it together with wrap. I remember making little purses and frames and cases for scissors and that sort of thing when I was young. And then my mum taught me how to do embroidery, and that has just stuck with me for my whole life. I've always had a passion for embroidery, but the patchwork really came later on. That isn't something that I learned as a child. My mum she was a knitter. She did embroidery, and my gran as well was a crocheter and did a lot of things like that, dressmaking. So I learned those sort of things as a child, but the patchwork came later on. So it was maybe about 10, 15 years ago now when I first made a quilt from patchwork squares. It wasn't the best, but we've all got to start somewhere, probably about 15 years ago. And then just little by little, it's grown into an obsession. And the English paper piecing, it was around 2016, I would say, that I discovered English paper piecing and just fell in love with hexagons because they're such a lovely shape to work with, and there's a lot of possibilities for what you can create. So I fell in love with that, but I didn't like the idea of having to cut all of the papers, and I also wanted to keep embroidery going as a hobby, and I didn't know if I had space for two time-consuming hobbies. And then I discovered a product for English paper piecing that is a substitute for paper, and it's actually a fabric and it's left in the work. It's called Hexiform. And when I discovered that, I realized, oh, I could create English paper pieced pieces, but also I could embellish them with embroidery. So I could do the two things at once. And that's when it all sort of clicked together for me. And yeah, it turned into an absolute obsession.
Now I have lots of questions. So, I should tell you that my first paper piecing project, I didn't actually do it. One of our quilt stores in town had what they call a yard sale, and I bought
hmm
this large plastic bag full of partially finished, it was a partially finished grandmother's flower garden quilt that someone
Mm.
had been started putting together. And there was actually a piece of paper in there that had the name of the lady who started it and when she started making
Oh,
it in the 1950s.
wow.
And it was very it was stained because obviously somebody hadn't stored it properly. So I ended up taking it apart. I took out the pieces that went around the hexie flowers and I salvaged 25 of the hexie flowers and appliqued them to blocks and then put the quilt
Yeah.
together. It's waiting to be
Oh, lovely.
quilted. I haven't had a chance to quilt it yet, but that was my first exposure to English paper piecing.
Mm,
And then I
mm,
decided to try actually making the hexie flowers myself and doing the English paper piecing. I have not yet heard of this product that you talk about because I still cut all of my papers. I do them on my AccuQuilt cutter, so I don't have to do them by hand. But tell me a
mm.
little bit more. You can embroider through the paper, is that correct?
Yes, because it's not actually paper, it's a stiff type of fabric. It's almost like a stabilizer, so it's got more structure to it than a wadding or a batting, and it's thinner, and it just holds its shape, but it is a textile, so you can stitch straight into it. So it really means that it opens up a lot of possibilities. And when you use it, you can actually omit using a wadding or a batting altogether because it does add that stability to the piece. If you could put wadding in and then it would be even thicker, but it just gives you that scope for possibility, really. It's a really interesting product. It's changed the way I look at things completely.
Because you don't make only quilts, you make lots of other items.
Yes, and that's another reason why the hexiform is really good for me because it's got that structure to it. So you can use it in making sewing cases, great for small projects, which is what I'm drawn to, like cushion covers. It's great for applique and it gives a bit of a puffy raised texture to it. When you applique, say, hexie flowers to a quilt, it just gives a bit of dimension to your piece. And I'm very much drawn to small projects and miniature patchwork as well. I do that a lot. So also you don't have to remove it afterwards. It's left in as opposed to paper, which is taken away. So it also takes that step of the process away. Because I know a lot of people don't like pulling out the papers. So it's good for that as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting product, something that I've used for many years now.
When you do your embroidery, are you using cottons? Are you using wools, silks? What threads are you using?
Yeah, I use a mixture really. I typically use a lot of the standard stranded cotton, like a DMC, stranded cotton embroidery thread. But I use a variety. I like using Wonderfil Alana thread, which is a wool and acrylic blend. It's like a 12 weight thread that you can get really nice effects with that. It adds an extra dimension, some texture to it. I also like using their fruity thread, which is another 12 weight thread. That's cotton. And you can use that for big stitch hand quilting and things, but you can embroider with it as well. So yeah, a whole mixture really, but mostly I would use the stranded cotton. It comes in so many colors, the DMC. So yeah.
I'm a Wonderful educator, so I'm quite fond of Wonderful threads.
Yes, I'm a big fan. I love everything, their range. Yeah, that's good.
Where do you get your inspiration? I think you probably have, we call them thrift stores here in the United States.
Mm.
And I love to go to thrift stores. I found all sorts of great things at thrift stores. Is is that one of the places that you get inspiration?
Yes, definitely. We call them charity shops here. So yeah, same thing though. It's amazing what you can find in a thrift store or a charity shop. Other people's things that they've gotten rid of and they don't want anymore, but are treasures to me. You can really find some amazing textiles. I really love collecting vintage tablecloths that have been hand embroidered and tray mats and doilies and things like that. You can find lots of treasure in antique shops as well. And I get a lot of inspiration also from visiting historical places. Like I visited Jane Austen's house, and she actually has an English paper pieced quilt there, and other sort of historical houses in Great Britain. Yeah, it's amazing that when you look back in history, there is a lot of inspiration in terms of quilts and also embroideries and tapestries. And yeah, I'm also inspired a lot by nature as well, and it all sort of seems to link together for me because I use a lot of florals for fabrics, and a lot of the embroidery I do is floral as well. So yeah, I always take a bit of inspiration from nature and history, I would say.
So, English paper piecing obviously has been around a while. If Jane
Mm,
Austen
yeah.
hasn't quilted her at the museum, uh, do
hmm
you have any information on the history? I don't know anything about it other than that I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely hundreds of years old. It's probably one of the oldest um, patchwork techniques. And I guess because it was really accessible, it was, it's completely sewn by hand. You don't need any sort of machine. So yeah, it's probably one of the oldest techniques. I couldn't say accurately when it began. I'm not sure it's even known really, but and there's a bit of debate about whether it actually did originate from England. So we call it English paper piecing, but I'm not 100% certain we can say it definitely came from England. I think it was done in other parts of the world as well. So that's a bit of a, you know, an unsure term to use. Some people don't actually like calling it English paper piecing, but um, that's the term that I have always known it as. I think most of us do. Um, so yeah, and the Quilters Guild in Great Britain has a lot of examples of English paper piece quilts going back, 1800s, even like 1700s, like with the papers still in as well, which is really nice because that's how you can date something, and you can see how they repurposed letters and envelopes and things like that. So it was really a frugal way of creating patchwork in that sense. Repurposing paper and then also repurposing textiles as well from clothing. So it does have a quite a big history.
Let's switch gears a little bit. How did this evolve into a business for you?
Well, I would say the power of the internet changed my life completely with this. So I was a primary school teacher, and that is what I was doing. I was dedicating my life to that, putting so much into it. And, sewing has always been a hobby of mine, but when I was teaching, it was something I didn't have a lot of time to do. And when I became a parent to my little boy, I took some time away from teaching to stay at home with him. And it was at that time he was having huge nap times, 2 hours every afternoon, really long. And so I had the choice. I said to myself, I can either do housework in that time or I can do my crafts because I've never really had enough time to do those. So that's the choice I made. And at that time, I was following along with other accounts on Instagram and I thought, okay, I'll join in and I'll start sharing my work on there. And that was around the time that I was really getting into the English paper piecing. And at that time, video wasn't as big on Instagram as it is now. Video was only just starting out, and I did a lot of video posts that really caught people's attention. And I think people were intrigued with the stitching into the English paper piecing pieces because they were asking me all the time, how can you sew through the paper? And I had to explain I wasn't using paper. So that caught some attention, really. And I created a piece using 1/2 inch hexagons, and I named it after my late grandmother. She was called Mabel, so I called it Mabel's Garden because it's a grandmother's flower garden piece, only miniature. It's probably only about 10.5 inches wide. It's small, but it's in that traditional grandmother's flower garden quilt. And I was sharing that online, and then after that, I made a sewing case in the shape of a hexagon, again with the 1/2 inch hexagons on the front as an embellishment. And that's when people started to say to me, "Have you got a pattern for that?" And I didn't. So I went away and spent a couple of months working on the pattern. And then it was just before the pandemic when I brought the pattern out, and it was really well received. And I started to think, okay, well, maybe this could be a business. So I went away and worked on another pattern for a hexagon storage basket, and I brought that out. It was really well received. And that's when I sort of thought, okay, yes, I'll really start to build my website, have a little web shop. So it just gradually grew bit by bit. People were also saying to me, "Have you got a YouTube channel?" And I was thinking, I'm not a YouTuber. I'm a quiet person. I just like to sit and sew. I'm not a big extrovert. But people were always suggesting it to me. So I thought, okay, it's 2020. What have we got to lose? I'll start a YouTube channel. And that grew. And then just bit by bit, everything has grown naturally into what is now my full-time job. I now have a small studio space. I teach here about once a month. I also teach at the Festival of Quilts and other shows in the country. Yeah, and I'm lucky enough to say that this is my job at the moment, and I haven't gone back to teaching traditionally like what I was originally doing. So I feel really grateful. It was the encouragement online that has led me to this. I think if I hadn't have had that, I would never have taken that leap. So yeah, it's really special.
That's wonderful. You're a little bit younger than I am, I think, or a lot younger than I am. I'm at that age where like I had to hire somebody to do my social media because it was just one more thing that I didn't want to have to deal with. So it's inspiring for me to hear those kinds of stories. And the online community, I think, is very encouraging.
Yes, I really do believe that there is space for everybody. I don't see it as competition. I see it as community over competition, absolutely. And, the more people there are sharing, sewing, whatever type it is, it only benefits everybody else as it attracts more people in and it just keeps the industry going, which I just think is so important. But we don't want to lose this, do we? We don't want to lose growing the craft and getting more and more people in. And I think the power of social media is the way to do that these days. You reach people that you just would never be able to reach. It's incredible to receive messages from people in countries like South Korea, Saudi Arabia, like reaching people across the world and just keeping it alive. Really, that's the really positive side of the internet. We know the internet has its downsides as well, but yeah, to build a community and keep people interested, it's really positive in that way.
So you said you were teaching in your studio? What kinds of classes do you teach there?
So I just have a small studio. I can only teach 6 people at a time, and I teach the miniature patchwork. So the Mabel's Garden design. That's been my most popular class so far. And people have just really enjoyed coming along, having a really nice, relaxing day where all they have to think about is what they're creating. It's all very well doing it at home, isn't it? But we get distracted by life happening around us and, the pile of clothes that need putting away. But when you come away and you go to a class, you're solely focused on that. So that's been a really popular class. Also, been teaching other classes on my other designs. So I've got one coming up where we're going to make little houses and make a little village applique design, just mini quilts. So again, the small projects, yeah, that people seem to really like. They're more manageable than maybe tackling a huge quilt.
Yes, absolutely. I haven't done a grandmother's flower garden because that just seems so unattainable in so many ways.
Yeah,
I like the little embroidery projects that I can work on for an hour or two after dinner.
yeah, more
And
manageable.
yes, absolutely. So, talk a little bit about your store. Obviously, you sell your patterns. Do you sell other supplies there too?
Yeah, so I have kind of two shops, if you like. So one is where I sell the physical products that I post to people. So my kits, I also sell some haberdashery items. So scissors, thread, Wonderfil thread. I'm a stockist of their thread, so I sell that. I really like to use the Invisifil. I think it's really great for EPP, get really great results with that. And also the fruity thread that I mentioned before, I sell that too. Um, I also sell small cuts of fabric sometimes, so like 5-inch squares. I use a lot of Liberty fabric in my designs, so I often have packs of like 20 different Liberty prints in 5-inch squares. So small amounts that are good for this type of patchwork where my designs are all based around a kind of scrappy patchwork look. So that's why I don't sell fabric by the yard or anything like that, just small amounts. And then I also have a digital pattern shop where I sell my patterns as digital downloads, and quite often there's pre-recorded video workshops to go with them. If you just need that extra bit of support with making a pattern, then there's the video to watch as well. And I also have a Patreon as well, which is another place that is another income stream for me and another place in which I share my work. And patrons get benefits. They get I do a block of the month, so they get access to that as part of their membership every month. So the block of the month keeps me busy. It's a new mini quilt design every month, and it comes with video lessons as well. I really try and incorporate video lessons into as much as I can, as much as I can into what I do, because I really think people do like that visual to help them. So yeah, that's my shop in a nutshell, really.
You seem to be a natural teacher, and I love that
Oh,
you trained as a teacher and now you've kind of redirected that into teaching sewing. We need to keep these things alive.
yeah, I'm really passionate about teaching. I loved teaching. I loved teaching children. And it was just natural for me to start to um, teach online when I was sharing my work because people had questions. And so that's how you sort of answer them, isn't it? You're educating people. And it was just natural for me to, yeah, that's what my YouTube channel is about as well. There's a lot of tutorials on there. Yeah, so it was just natural for me to share the learning.
I had somebody say to me a few weeks ago, nobody sews anymore. And I said, oh, I
Oh,
don't think that's true.
no, I think it's growing. I do feel like it's growing. More people are becoming interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything I haven't asked you about that you'd like to talk about?
I could talk a little bit about my YouTube channel, and
Sure.
my YouTube channel is a place where I share a lot of tutorials. Like I said, I really enjoy teaching, so that naturally comes through there. And they're quite often linked to free patterns. I have a huge library. It's really quite vast now on my website of free patterns because that's really important to me. Yes, this is my business, but also, you know, I really strongly believe in sewing and crafts being accessible to as many people as possible. So it's always been at the forefront of what I do, that I share things for free online as well. So I do have a huge library of free patterns now that quite often come with a YouTube video as well. So that's another way that people can get started. If you're listening to this and you're wondering how to get started in English paper piecing, then I would suggest have a look at my hexagon needlebook free pattern, as it's just a small needlebook that you can make entirely by hand in just a few hours. It uses some half-inch hexagons, but only 7 of them, so it's not too fiddly. And so that's a free pattern, and it has a video tutorial as well. And I just gave my 14-year-old niece a kit to make it, and she made it by the next day, and she sewed it beautifully. So it's really great for just dipping your toe in and getting started with hand sewing, and then you might get the bug and want to move on to something a little larger. But yeah, I think that's a really great place to begin.
One of the things that I love about English paper piecing is that even though it is obviously, as we've talked about, it is an older tradition, there's room for all sorts of kinds of expression through English paper piecing. So we have you who's doing vintage work and vintage designs, but I've also seen modern quilt designs and modern paper piecing. So it really is a form of expression that everybody can express themselves however they want to.
Yes, absolutely. And that's just the beauty of it, isn't it? There's a place for everything within it. And a lot of the techniques that I use, even though I'm drawn to the more traditional designs, a lot of the techniques I use are more modern. For example, glue basting rather than thread basting. I use glue. And, using a product like the Hexiform and Invisifil thread, a polyester thread, that's all very modern. But yes, there are people who create really modern designs through fabric choices, and yeah, there's just a place for everything, isn't there? So that's yeah, it's really great for that.
It's kind of a metaphor for all of sewing, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
So if people want to find out more, what is your website address and your
So my YouTube channel is Emma Jones Vintage Sewing Box, and my website is vintagesewingbox.co.uk, and I'm on Instagram as Vintage Sewing Box as well. So you put that in, I'll come up. You put that into Google, I'll probably come up there as well. So
Okay, and I will put all of this in the show notes too. So, well, it's been wonderful chatting with you. I'm inspired. I'm excited. I need to get my English paper piecing projects out.
oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Janet. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Emma. And if you haven't tried English paper piecing before, maybe that will inspire you to check out some of her free patterns. I do love embroidery as much as I like English paper piecing, and the idea of combining the two of them is very intriguing. So I'm sure I will be trying that in the near future too. Links to everything that we talked about in the interview will be on the show notes page at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. Thank you to those of you who have been leaving reviews and ratings on Apple Podcasts. I'm enjoying reading those. I do have a request for a future episode. I've gotten a number of emails asking if I could talk about pattern projectors, things like the Ditto pattern projector that Joann's was selling. I know nothing about pattern projectors, so if there is someone out there in the audience who wouldn't mind being interviewed, who has some experience using them, get in touch with me and maybe we can set something up, because that's a topic that I'd like to explore further. Usually after I get 2 or 3 requests for a topic, it seems to me that it's time to explore that topic, and pattern projectors is one that keeps coming up. So you can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. You can use the fan mail feature on the podcast on Apple Podcasts. I do enjoy hearing from all of my listeners, and I do try to respond as soon as I can. I just looked out the window as I finished recording this podcast, and it was snowing outside. Even in the middle of March, we still get snow. It doesn't last very long, but it's kind of demoralizing. So hopefully we'll be done with this soon and spring will be on the way. So until our next episode, I hope you have a wonderful week and that you get to go sew something.